Please make Ken Barret welcome. This evening Ken will be covering some very interesting areas of both physics, science and the esoteric. And if you know Ken like we know Ken, he has had many years experience in this area, many years of research, and as you can see by the geometry of some of his shapes and their connection with writings like of people like Buckminster Fuller, amongst others, the designing, the relationship to the Earth grid and interspatial grids, things discovered by people like Bruce Cathy, Captain Bruce Cathy, and others. I'm sure you will find his presentation this evening, shall we say, covering a broad spectrum of things and bringing a connection between different areas of what we're talking about. So please make him welcome, and I'll hand the floor over to you.
This presentation I'm putting together, I happened to be in Tasmania over a month ago. I had a beautiful opportunity to put a PowerPoint presentation together. I've been saying I'll be doing it for about 15 months. I've been putting it off, but the time was right. With some help from friends in northern Tasmania, I was able to work flat out for a week to get this presentation together, and I had to come back to Melbourne just to finish a few things off. But anyhow, I'll get underway. There's a few bit of literature I'd like to hand out during the talk, but if you can return the literature, because it's only copies I have. Okay. Now, this is what it's all about. All the designs are put in there. These people in Tasmania put these designs in, this particular header page. But now get on to the next one. Aim of presentation. Well, as you can really clearly see, I want to unite spirituality and science. And that way I can get a new understanding of science of consciousness and where even gravity fits into the unified field theory. My understanding is from the research I've done with the help of Dan Winter, David Wilcock and many other experts in this field, my conclusion is that to explain gravity you've got to explain consciousness and how it interacts with the physical plane of nature. And this will be the basis of my talk basically throughout the whole evening. Okay, I'll go on to the next one. Okay, this is my background. Way back in Swinburne University, just down the road here, I studied 1968, and I got an interest in sacred geometry, and I lived in the country, a little place called Rushworth, between Shepland and Bendigo, and I built all those beautiful shapes sitting on the table there. I did Reiki 1 and 2 in the late 1990s, so if people ever want healing from me later on, I can do that, but they have to ask me first. I just don't give it without permission. And as you all know, since late 2006, I studied Dan Winter. I remember you, John, you'd come with me to the first Dan Winter talk in December 2006. Yeah. So how is that? We both studied that together. I know John for many years, very close friends. He's really helped me and supported me in what I'm doing. So that's my background. Okay, now these are my 3D shapes. I had these photographed when I was in Tasmania at a friend's place in a place called West Ulverstone. And so if you look on the table there, those models you see there is what's sitting on the table. Plus other shapes that were given to me like Rubik's Cube, Rubik's dodecahedron. And I have since made a few shapes more recently out of gold-backed cardboard that you can see there. So you've got a very wide variety of shapes. For example, if you look at the little tetrahedron, they've all got one thing in common, those shapes. They all have the same edge length, which is 1 inch or 25 millimetres. But as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, well, they get bigger and bigger and bigger in size. That's only natural. So I get this fellow here on the left. That's but these complex shapes have a very interesting feature. This one here is a star of 5 interlocking tetrahedrons. This one here is 5 interlocking octahedrons. This one up here is 10 interlocking tetrahedrons. Just to do some of the more complex shapes. And the one up here is the most complex. That's 5 interlocking cubes. That has in fact got 360 facets, or 540 edges, or 180 vertices. And the vertices are both, peaks and valleys. So you've got everything built in that shape there. Now what I've done here, if you look at the table there, I have split them up into 2 groups, because the ones here on your right, on your left I should say, are the crystalline cubic shapes, which are based on minerals, rocks and so forth. If you look at their mathematical analysis, which I've studied inside out from scratch, these are all based on root 2, root 3 only. Now go to the other side to your right, you've got the golden ratio shapes, which are these ones. Now these include not just root 2 and root 3, but root 5 as well. Now the root 5 is very, very important, because that is the basis of the Fibonacci spiral and the fractal spiral. Anything that's got fractals in it has to contain root 5. There's a guy called Ian Lawler who wrote the book Sacred Geometry, or I can't place the name of the book, but he made it quite clear that all life forms incorporate the square root of 5, which in actual fact is the diagonal across 2 squares. And root 5 is the basis of the golden ratio, which I'll get into now. Okay. Now, so let's look at the golden mean. This is very, very important. I used the Greek letter phi on the left, and I'll put it to 6 decimal places. It does go to infinity. The number of decimal places is actually infinite. But for all practical purposes, there's only 6. And I have written it out up there, root 5 plus 1 over 2. You can see it's got the root 5 right through it. That would be the accurate value of those expressions. Now we get into the Fibonacci sequence. This is how nature works. When nature builds everything out, it builds upon itself. And if you look at it very closely, it's got a very interesting pattern to it. 0 plus 1 equals 1. 1 plus 1 equals 2. 2 plus 3 equals 5. 8 plus 5 equals 13. And so on and so on. But when you get that series infinitely big, say up to billions if not trillions, and then you take the ratio of the last 2 terms, you'll get phi, the value of phi, which is this one here. If you take the last and the third last, you get phi squared. The last and the fourth last, phi cubed. But if you get back to this one and invert it, as you've done over there, you get 1 over phi. So this is a fact of nature. This is how creation works. Creation does have a definite physics to it. And that's what I'm here to explain to you tonight. And later on, toward the end of the talk, you'll see in a bit more detail how it all works. Okay, now I've also included the golden spiral. This is a very, very common shape, which you'll see in a moment. Just get back to the how this sequence works. I did this experiment with any 2 numbers. Doesn't matter what any 2 numbers are, and you follow that same pattern. Can you see all that quite clearly? Okay, and so that you get another Fibonacci sequence. So if I analyse that a little bit more closely, this is what you get. You get phi squared, phi cubed, phi to the 4th, phi to the 5th. It just goes on and on like that. Okay. Now, this is an interesting one here, the golden mean in nature. I'd like to hand out a copy of the sheet for your own perusal. I'll just get this out for you. Okay. Okay, get on the scale of electromagnetics. This would answer your question here. What I put here, see? You've got the electromagnetic wave. Now, when photons propagate, they rotate at the same time, tracing out a transverse spiral. But when you actually have vector cancellation as shown on the right, you get destructive interference happening. So it goes from transverse to longitudinal propagation, which is like the propagation of sound waves in a gas. In this case, it's sound waves in the ether. Because when you phase out electromagnetic waves, it becomes an etheric vibration, longitudinal. But the funny thing is, when you get the energy in that mode, the longitudinal spiral actually implodes. It goes like that to a nexus point. Now that, from what I can understand, is the key to going from relativity into quantum mechanics. Now we say that relativity and quantum mechanics are miles and miles apart, and there's always been a search for bridging the gap, to even the point that they even apparently contradict. I don't see that they do contradict, but let me explain one thing before I go any further. Now the concept of the ether was recognised by Tesla, Einstein himself, all the earlier physicists. But when the Michelson-Morley experiment was done in 1886, I think it was, they couldn't detect an ether, therefore it was rejected. And they said the speed of light is an absolute constant, regardless. Now, 100 years later, there's a book by Greg Braden called The Divine Matrix. Now, if you look at that book, something caught my attention very powerfully. That same Michelson-Morley experiment was repeated 100 years later, virtually to the year in fact, and guess what they detected? An ether actually was detected. So a lot of people think that Einstein is wrong. From the research that I've done, Einstein was merely incomplete, and there are reasons for why a lot of the stuff was incomplete. That was, I think, to protect big business. But that'll be discussed later, the reason for that. Okay, so you are quite clear about the relationship between photons and scalar waves. It's all in Tom Bearden, chennier.org. He does fully explain that. I'll go to the next slide. Okay, here's something else. The soliton and free energy. This is another very interesting effect of scalar electromagnetic energies. What actually occurs when you get this action going back and forth like that, okay, it sucks in energy from the ether. Now, in nuclear physics, they're referred to as virtual electrons. And most nuclear physicists do recognise all virtual particles, which we call the ether. Dan Winter refers to that as charge. Tom Bearden refers to that as massless charge. So you've got many different names for the ether, which is and that's spelt with an A, not the ether that you sniff up your nose and get high on. That's got to bear that in mind. But what actually happens when you actually get this action happening, they have what they call pump waves being drawing in from the surrounding ether, creating a configuration term four-wave mixing, which is called a soliton, and that is the key to free energy. Once again, in nature, it happens in the far infrared microwave part of the spectrum. I remember when I studied physics back in the 60s, I was curious about this part of the microwave spectrum, which borders on infrared to microwave. And they say, oh, very little is known about that. I think a lot is known about it has been suppressed. And I'll explain later why. So that's the whole way you get free energy. And when this occurs, you always get a drop in temperature, because it's called entropy reversal. Now, mainstream physics says that there's only positive entropy, which is order into chaos, and that's it. That's a win-lose situation, a death situation. But when you look at the structure of consciousness, it's quite the opposite. Okay, so I'll get on to the next slide. Now I'll get on to the nature of gravity. Okay, I quoted Isaac Newton, what he did. I remember that when he was sitting having his lunch at Cambridge University, an apple fell on his head. So, hey, what's causing this apple to fall on my head? And, oh, it's gravity. So he thought, oh, okay, it got us curious. He's a genius. He's a very, very smart man, Newton. He's where he saw Isaac. Now, of course, then he will learn later on that it keeps planets in their orbits, holds atmospheres in place around planets. It's very, very important because it's a structuring energy. Now, Henry Cavendish, later on, measured the gravitational force between two bodies. Now, what Henry Cavendish actually discovered, when he had, say, two masses of identical magnitude, they come together very equally. But when he had a very large mass and a small mass over here, what actually happened, the small mass gravitated to the big mass, not the other way around. I see close parallels between that and Wilhelm Reich's work with so-called orgone energy or life force, which I'll touch on a bit later. Now, according to Wilhelm Reich, low concentrations of life force always gravitates to higher concentrations of life force. So once again, this could be a possible indication that that the gravitational field around all massive objects is to do with the auric field, the life force. But once again, later on, that will be fully explained. Okay, let's continue on. Now, Nikola Tesla, brilliant electrical inventor, he actually had come up with his own theories of gravitation and developed anti-gravity. Now, this is interesting. Back in 1893, 10 years before the Wright brothers flew their first aeroplane, apparently Tesla developed what you call a flying belt. He strapped it around his waist, and he did this at a hotel in New York City. And apparently he floated out of the window. Many stories up. Now, of course, the first time I heard about flying belts is if you look at the Buck Rogers comics. Okay, of Buck Rogers' fame, the flying belt technology. So I would strongly believe, I don't know for sure, but my belief is that the guy who wrote down these Buck Rogers type comics was very much a fan of Tesla. So it's just another way of promoting Tesla through popular science fiction. Buck Rogers. Interesting stuff. But anyhow, Einstein come on the scene. He developed the general theory of relativity. He got a major Nobel Prize for that. That was in the early 1900s, 1905 actually, he got that prize. And he defined gravity as the curvature of space-time, and at this point, that is accurate. A lot of people I think is wrong, but the study I've done of this whole subject, that is highly accurate, because the curvature it's not just a curvature of space-time, it's a fractal curvature. And this is the whole key to consciousness, and what makes us tick. So so Einstein there was spot on. Okay, now mainstream science says it's a property of mass that bends light and causes an acceleration. Yes, astrophysicists know that. And what actually occurs when you got all these galaxies together, all the light never leaves the universe. It's like a black hole. The light goes in a huge circle called a geodesic. And its circumference might be in the range of, say, 30 to 40 billion light years. Assuming the universe is 15 billion years across. So we know that when you get the space-time curvature of bending light, that is the nature of an acceleration which does not have inertia. Now, Dan Winter, on the other hand, this is where he really impressed me. He calls it a phase conjugate fractal wave motion. Now, you're very clear on fractal, on phase conjugation. In any question, you can always ask me a bit later. But here's the other point too. This applies not just to electromagnetic, but it can apply to acoustic energy, even sound. So if you get sound and phase conjugated, you'll get the same effect. In other words, you'll interface the very fabric of space-time. You can interface it either electromagnetically or acoustically. Either way, doesn't matter. What actually happens, it applies to a centre point, such as frequency and velocity increases recursively in accordance with the golden ratio. And this is where the speed of light does in fact increase. When you get into a black hole or wormhole, everything changes, physics changes, light changes. Sure, when light is launched out there in flat space-time, yeah, it will go exactly 186,000 miles a second. But once it gets into a vortex like that, it can go billions of times the speed of light. And this is the key to deep space travel, and I believe this is the key to how other beings out there in space or across the universe, including the heavenly angels, interact with us and get here, because they work on that principle. Okay, now this I got out of Joseph Cade's book. I've got it here in the table if you want to have a look at it. He explains quite clearly what Joseph Cade says about the very nature of gravity. It's a submillimetre microwave radiation. Once again, the frequency is in the terahertz range. It's around about, the wavelength is about 1 millimetre, and its frequency is around about 300 gig to 1,000 gig. Much, much higher than the harmful microwaves that we're exposed to. Because these are the microwaves that nature works with. These are the microwaves that's associated with healing and life force. And it's, if you look at this little graph here, you can see where gravity effects do maximise, something between the far infrared and the longer microwave frequencies, like radar, etc. Okay, I think Joseph Cade, is very accurate. He probably concurs with electric universe theory, and I think he wrote another book called Ultimate Reality. I'll get a little bit later as well. Okay, now into David Wilcock. I've got his books here. Source Field Investigations. That's a really good book, and Synchronicity Key. This one here, Source Field Investigations, taught me just so much to help me put this presentation together. Now he reckons it's a torsional field with a double helical structure like DNA. This is how gravity does in fact propagate. What it does, you've got one helix like that overlapping with a second helix going the opposite way. When you get that configuration, it then goes into a nexus point. That's the way it's structured. This is how it works. This is how gravity propagates right throughout the whole cosmos. So therefore, and what Dan Witherbrook explained, in my opinion, it is this structure that will have the property of internal dialogue, thus resulting in self-awareness or consciousness. Bear one thing in mind, consciousness is out there in the cosmos. Our brain and neurophysiology does not generate it, it just taps into it. And I believe that consciousness ultimately does have a divine origin. It has to. But the thing is, we can have the right circuitry, the right neurology to tap into it. And once again, this type of field energy is in the form of a caduceus or tapered coil. In other words, a vortex or a funnel. You see this in a tornado. You see this in galactic superjets. I've got information on that here as well. I can look at it a bit later. And so everywhere you go in nature, even a bolt of lightning has got the double helical structure. If you look at a tornado, for example, you've got one part going out like that. If you look at the news on what tornadoes do, I've seen it plenty of time on YouTube. Now what actually occurs there, when a tornado hits, rather than everything being spun out at fantastic speeds, which should normally happen, everything appears to be in slow motion. All the debris just appears to float. I even saw a photograph of 2 6-ton trailers levitating like that, just hovering, just floating. Anti-gravity. In a severe storm. In addition to that, I've seen photos of bits of straw embedded in glass mirrors. I've got those photos here with me. Another one of a heavy wooden branch embedded in a steel bridge in Missouri. That was back in the late 1800s. I heard of a case where a live mouse was neatly embedded in a tree and the mouse was still alive. Rather than brute force slamming stuff like that together, it goes in like that. It gets very gently placed because there's a space-time distortion happening. That sort of reminds me of the Philadelphia experiment, where the similar thing happened there, where crew got embedded in the superstructure of the ship, because Tesla and Einstein, all those helped together to set up the experiment, and Tesla wired the whole ship to create an intense scalar field. So when you get energies in this form, they do some very weird and wonderful things. The so-called unexplained, but I'm here to explain it. So you clear on that?
Oh.
I'll go to the next one. Okay, according to Tom Bearden, it is a product of the optical destructive interference of any type of wave motion. I say any type, doesn't matter what it is. Needs to be a factor for its stability and maintenance, and that's very, very important. If black holes aren't fractal, they have a tendency to evaporate. In other words, they're unstable. But when they're fractal, they're very, very stable. I believe if you look at a proton in itself has a highly fractal structure because it's been worked out that the half-life of a proton is something like 10 to the power 36 years, and that's a heck of a long time. And even hydrogen, as Dan Witter said, is highly fractal as well. Because of its implosion and vortexual nature, it is able to exceed the speed of light, therefore has no inertia. Because you're dealing with a space-time curvature, and that because you've got the light increasing in velocity, you can go faster than light. That's the only way you can do it. You can't use a rocket ship and use brute force and get out there. That's impossible. You'll be travelling forever. It just can't be done. But with this type of technology, you can do it. Okay, next one. Gravity and consciousness memory can continue. This type of motion exhibits quantum non-locality after passing through the nexus centre point, thus creating self-awareness or consciousness in addition to its double helical structure. Okay, are you clear on that? Because once you hit that centre point, you're everywhere at once. They say you're in time, space, or hyperspace. As I said in the next paragraph, this type of field energy flips over space-time to time-space at the nexus point. And it's out of this book here, Source Field Investigations. This very book here. So I got the information from. This also exhibits the properties of negative entropy. Has been observed to cause a drop in temperature and restore order from chaos. Now if you get into the geocell technology, which some of you are familiar with, they run cars on water, actually on life force. Engines ice up because you always get a drop in temperature. Even Victor Schauberger observed the same thing. He's looking to fish up, trout up a waterfall, and he looked at water, how it vortexes and how it tends to freeze over. And you get a bit of a blue glow around it. That's called Tsunomo's fire. That's associated with this effect as well. My understanding is the blue glow occurs when you actually cross the light barrier. That's called Cherenkov radiation. That's a term used by nuclear physicists. Okay, I'll get on the next slide. Now I'll get into the structure of DNA. I'll just let you have a look at this one as well. Well, it's sort of self-explained there. That diagram in the bottom right, I've seen that like in forensic science. You can see how DNA is very multiply braided. My understanding is that the more braided that DNA is, the more consciousness that we can tap into. This is why our brain is highly braided, our lower colon's highly braided, all our guts, everything, even the microtubules in our nerves. And the braiding is very, very important because this is the key to making us more and more conscious. They say, well, Dan Witter says that the heart muscle itself, that's got 7 external braids and 5 internal braids. It's got 7 like that and 5 internal like that. That's a heart muscle. And they say that the heart muscle is the centre of consciousness in the human body. And of course the brain is an instrument that just taps into it, and we only have 3% of that awareness, just 3%. The other 97%, which is so-called junk DNA, is our potential, and it's really our mind. This is to enable us to be very specially advanced beings. I believe this is how we differ from all other species right across the board. It's not a question of intelligence, it's a question of awareness. And it's all to do with the braiding of the DNA. And you can see from that there. Now here's another thing too. Double helical structure of DNA. It's fractal, self-aware, feedback principle. It's got memory. Each strand is held together by hydrogen bonding between the actual DNA bases, adenosine, guanine, etc. Now hydrogen bonding and it is important because this is where the life force gravitates toward the hydrogen bonding itself. I did explain to you earlier about why a proton has such a fantastically long half-life, because of its highly fractal nature. And this is why even Dr. Emoto, he even discovered that water itself holds memory, and especially emotional memory. And don't also forget that DNA is both a semiconductor and a superconductor. Tom Beard explained that. Okay, now here's an interesting one too. Because I studied biochemistry back in the 60s, I learned all about the formulas. Look at that molecular structure there. Anyhow, if you look at those ring structures, you've got a hexagon and a pentagon. Now, what actually happens, they coalesce together, which is called forming clathrate cages. And if you go over to the right side there, notice how the pentagonal hexagonal ring structures reveal the sacred geometry of this shape, which is this. That's a clathrate. So this is very much again the key to our biology. The buckyball, the truncated icosahedron. So, and that's common with all biologically active substances. They've all got that feature. Hexagons, pentagons together tend to form a clathrate. So this helps to channel consciousness. This is why we have these hormones. If it wasn't for these hormones, we wouldn't be the free-thinking, aware people that we would be or could be. So that's important in our structure of all DNA, all hormones, all biologically active substances. Now, once again, I come to David Wilcock. DNA has an extremely wide universal distribution. It is very, very abundant throughout the whole cosmos. To me, this is a very, very far cry from what mainstream science teaches, how evolution occurs on planet Earth, and it takes billions of years. Well, I completely and wholeheartedly disagree with that. Totally disagree with that. To me, it just doesn't make sense. In my opinion, life has got to be everywhere. That is throughout the universe, the multiverse, even the omniverse. In other words, all metaphysical dimensions. It's just the way the whole fabric of space-time is structured. Therefore, realise that DNA is not just physical, it has a metaphysical or ghostly counterpart as well. And this is where it gets really interesting. Yes, I've got 15 minutes. Okay, now get into the quantum aspects of DNA. I just put together so I'd like to pass around and let you have a good look at this. So that, where are we? Yeah. Just pass. Yeah, just have a good look at that, and you can look at these as well and see. Just pass them on. Okay. Now I've selected off the internet different sources for a few diagrams. See the third one in the middle when I spoke about the heart? Now the structure of the heart muscle. Can you see the 7 external braids and the 5 internal braids? That's from Dan Winter actually. And I've got another example of the Mandelbrot set. Even a heavenly being second from the right. You've got the Merkaba. You've got the infinity symbol. In other words, I'm getting into a realm where we're now getting outside relativity, getting into quantum physics proper. Because DNA is very, very important to that. If you read Greg Braden's book, Divine Matrix, he does fully explain that. So anyhow, look at those sheets I'm passing around and you'll be able to have a good close look at that in greater detail. Okay, now I'll give you the proof of the quantum behaviour of DNA. Now this to me is I would call this the guts of my talk tonight. Now this is the clinching one. Once again, David Wilcock explained the Peter Garriev experiment. Now, who of you have heard of Peter Garriev? Any of you heard of him? Okay. Okay, he's a brilliant Russian scientist, physicist. He demonstrated that DNA not only bends light in a spiraling manner, but even absorbs it. What he did, he got a tube, a tiny little bit of DNA, maybe weighing a microgram or nanogram, and he actually shone a laser through the DNA, and the light went like that, spiraled into it, and somehow got trapped inside the DNA, suggesting like entering a black hole. Now I've got something here on black hole physics, just to illustrate that point. If you go to astrophysics, it's just a diagram of what black holes look like out there in deep space. Well, what's happening out there in deep space is happening inside our very DNA, the same thing, exactly the same. Okay? So once again, this is what the physical DNA does at this stage. The light goes in, spirals in, somehow gets trapped. Now, this was done, okay, this is what the second paragraph explains. Now here's the interesting part. That sample was physically removed from the small tube, physically removed, and where the space where the DNA was, the light still went like that. So what in the hell is in the DNA is causing that to act to the light? That's called the DNA phantom effect. That, by the way, persisted for 30 days in the same evacuated space. That, to me, has to be none other than its memory, in my opinion. Because even through liquid nitrogen on that space, and he upset it for about five or so minutes, and that just returned again. Now it's keeping that in mind, he also used the same technique to recode a developing frog embryo into a developing salamander embryo. This is all done with laser light only. Once again, it's all in this beautiful book by David Wilcock. Very, very good stuff. So apparently he also turned a chicken into a duck. So maybe you can get light of a certain, so if you've got too many chooks, well, you can turn some into ducks. or you can turn the fly into a spider or a human being into a horse if you misbehaves too much. You know the old saying, if you don't go to sleep, you'll turn into a pumpkin. Well, maybe this is a technique to do that. so there you go. So all clear on that? Okay. Now this reveals some very interesting things. When I look at the general theory of relativity, it opens up a few of what I call a can of worms. This is the actual basis of Einstein's general theory of relativity. I can see that. In other words, you don't necessarily mean a large mass, okay, to do that with light. See, the general theory says you've got to have a huge mass like a supermassive black hole to do that with light. Well, this demonstrates you don't need a big mass. Okay, when Einstein got that Nobel Prize for published general theory, he was assisted by Professor John Wheeler, who died in 2008. He's an American physicist who assisted Einstein in developing that theory. He coined the terms quantum foam, wormhole, by popularising the term black hole. But the thing about Wheeler, when I checked out his website on the internet, I found he also had a good knowledge of radionics, healing coils, etc. So he had a good understanding of biophysics on one level or another. So it's interesting how it took someone like John Wheeler to help Einstein formulate the general theory of relativity. So it's very interesting when you see how these people think and how they work. Now this reveals the fact that the bending of light, or the distortion of space-time, does not necessarily need large masses such as planets, stars or galaxies. Now at this point, some very important questions are raised. Is it gravity that distorts space-time? Is it life force that has this effect? Is it life force that is responsible for gravitational effects as in nature? Now everyone asks those questions. Okay? Okay, more questions. Is this the basis of quantum teleportation? Once again, you're dealing with inertial accelerations, you're dealing with being able to exceed the speed of light and get into the quantum realm. So the second question, the key to faster light travel. Is this the reason for memory, self-awareness and consciousness? Is this the explanation of black hole wormhole existence? Some astrophysicists claim that black holes don't exist. I strongly believe that they do exist because it's in our very DNA that this principle firmly applies. Now, before I get on to the next part, that'll be the second part. I've got 10 minutes left, maybe 5 minutes for question time. Any of you have got questions? It's this far away. Any questions?
They say that there are children being born now with extra strands of DNA. How does that fit into what you're talking about?
That is correct, yes. Now, they say that we're going to have 12 strands of DNA. We've normally got 2. But as our junk DNA so-called activates, we are going to have 12 strands. And there are races of children coming through. They call them the golden crystal children. I've heard that expression.
The children of the blue.
Yeah, and they're coming through loud and clear because what is actually happening, I believe that we're moving into another, David Wilcock explains this, that we're moving into another part of the galaxy where the energies are different. I think the speed of light is even different as well. It's probably faster.
Well, the speed of light in our solar system would be different to another solar system.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Well, not only that, in David Wilcock's book, Sourceful Investigations, he even explained that there's a guy called William Tiller, who's an astrophysicist. He even looked at distant galaxies, and he's able to measure gravity waves coming from them. He's able to look at the background microwave radiation, that is, from distant galaxies, and he's able to actually register changes in light speed or etheric density. You see, when you talk about ether, it's like sound. Sound has a frequency, it has a quality. Well, it's the same with the ether. Vibrations in the ether have a frequency and they have a quality to them. And I believe personally that this is where the speed of light can vary. And astrophysicists have determined that. I'll just give you another example of this. Any of you have heard of Royal Rife?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Royal Rife is interesting. He, back in 1933, developed a way of being able to look at living viruses under an ordinary microscope. When I say ordinary, using light. Normally, to look at those very small organisms, you've got to have an electron microscope. Of course, that would kill the virus. But Royal Rife got around that. He was able to look at these living creatures, even the tiny spores that they hatched from. So they went through the whole cycle called morphogenesis, from the spore to the virus to the fungus to the bacteria, and then it dies, releasing those same spores. That's called the morphogenesis cycle. And not only that, there's a guy called Franz Popp in Germany, also discovered how these bugs kill their host. They do so through emitting ultraviolet. He actually used a glass, experimented with a glass filter in between, and the host had no effect on the germs had no effect on the host. When you replace it with a quartz slide, it had effect, which proves that all living organisms do put out a subtle blue ultraviolet frequency, which I think is associated with Cherenkov radiation. That blue you see in a thunderstorm.
It could be related also to Carillion photography.
Yeah, well, I'll touch on that later, Carillion photography. That's to do with microwaves. But anyhow, getting back to Royal Rife, to look at this type of process, he actually had what you call a dark field microscope. He had a dark field capacitor. It is a very complex optical microscope, and this dark field capacitor enabled him to look at these organisms using light, I strongly believe, of a much higher velocity. Yes, of a much higher velocity in order to see those complex organisms. And he made it very, very clear that bugs or viruses or germs are very important for the ecology, but the reason why we get sick is because our blood pH is slightly acidic through eating wrong food. If we alkalise our blood with lots of ways, sodium bicarbonate, barley green, I get at the health food shop, get our blood up to 7.4, those viruses won't do any harm. In fact, I've even turned into acidophilus. So that is my understanding of rural life. As you well know, here is shut down. There was another guy called Antoine Béchamp 50 years earlier, and another guy called Gaston Nations 50 years after Rife, who discovered the same thing.
There's a guy on the internet who's advertising Royal Raymond Graft products called Jeff Brents.
That's right, yeah, I've seen that website. Yeah. It's a good one. Yeah. Okay, John, your turn.
Do you know if there's any connection between Jung's postulation about the collective unconsciousness?
Yeah.
Does that link in with our consciousness, or is that a higher consciousness?
The collective unconsciousness is a higher consciousness. We're only 3% conscious, that's all, only 3%. What is out there, maybe when we pass over or whatever, we will become one with that much higher consciousness. But bear one thing in mind, if we carry a lot of unforgiveness, negative emotion, that'll be greatly amplified, called burning in hell. But if we're very joyful, happy, forgiving, it means going to heaven. It explains what's taught in the scriptures. So that will answer your question. Yeah. So the thing is, because we're in this very negative, dysfunctional world, it's a good thing that we are only 3% conscious. So we can handle all this emotional negativity. Otherwise, we just lose it.
But can the consciousness be, say, something happens somewhere, disaster happens, and does that affect the collective unconscious, so that we can feel it, we can be tapping into that?
It certainly would. Well,
whether we would feel that.
Well, they'd feel it much more than we would, because they have much greater awareness. Where there's greater awareness, the feeling of it is much stronger accordingly.
Or as you increase your awareness, you become more sensitive.
You do, very much so. Yes, yeah. I spoke about the quantum aspects of DNA and how everything is all interconnected, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and this is why. Now I get into work at Tesla. Now this is really exciting stuff. I just put together some photos I've got of the internet. Have a good pass it around, because the work of Tesla is very, very important into explaining what I'm trying to share with you tonight. Now, unfortunately, Tesla, as you all know, was squashed by JP Morgan, because what he did was upset the big business, the bankers, so they shut him down in the end. Sure, he's 86 when he passed on, but he did die of a broken heart. But there he is on the left. There's Wardenclyffe Tower. There's the electrical storm that he created. And there's some aspects of carrying a light bulb around, the hands, his coil in his laboratory, and all these amazing things with Tesla. So as far as I'm concerned, he's the man who really deserves all the credit. Of course, he didn't get a Nobel Prize because he upset the powers that be. But later on, I'll be talking about Eric Dollard, who actually independently rediscovered Tesla's secret. That, to me, I think that's divinely planned. There's no accident that Eric Dollard, years later, independently rediscovered Tesla's secret. But in any case, I'll get on to the Tesla stuff now. Okay, important discoveries. Now, remember those questions that I put to you earlier? Those questions about what is gravity? Okay, look at here. Are those discoveries the key to answer all those questions in slides 29 and 30? I'll just flash back to those slides. See those questions there? Just look at those questions once again, 1, 2 and 3 on that page. And that as well, those 4 questions, right? Just get in mind those questions. Now, let's look at Tesla. So now we answer all those questions. Someone said I'm a bit too quick. I'll just go back again. Sorry. I'll just go a bit slower this time. Yeah. So they're the first questions. Is it gravity that's distorts space-time? Is it life force that has this effect? Is it life force that is responsible for gravitational effects as in nature? Is this the basis of quantum teleportation? Is this the key to faster than light travel? Is this the reason for memory, self-awareness and consciousness? Is this the explanation of black hole and wormhole existence? There are 7 questions that I posed. Okay? Now, according to this, for the work of Tesla, I strongly say the answer is a resounding yes. Yeah, are you with me on that? Okay. Now here's a reason from Serbia. There's a museum over there. If you go over to Yugoslavia, there's a special museum showing all of Tesla's exhibits and works. That's where he came from originally. But the thing is, he had some very unexpected experiences at the Wardenclyffe Tower he built on Long Island, New York. And of course, his most important discovery was in his earliest career, the alternating electrical current AC. So the AC was recognised because that can be controlled. But the radiant energy that he discovered, you can't control it. The AC you can, and this is why we're paying through the nose for our energy. Because, thanks to the bankers and the establishment, this is why he's recognised for AC. He's the great inventor of AC current. Okay. Now later on, he was working at very high voltages. He experienced a stinging sensation when a back EMF was induced after switching off a DC current. Now I've got some interesting papers here. It will explain this in more detail. I'll hand them out here. Take time to study them. There's about a few sheets. What I've done here, I've just highlighted certain paragraphs with a marker. So hand it back to me when you're finished. But each look through that, it'll explain in more detail because I've got the information from that. Now, Tesla found that very painful when he decided to build a Faraday cage, even have a steel door, did all those things. Now, Faraday cage, as you well know, is designed to screen out all electromagnetic fields, RF energy inside. But he discovered to his dismay that this type of shielding failed to protect him. According to Eric Dollard from Bolinas, California, the completely independent rediscoverer of his secrets. So Tesla is not lost after all. Thanks to Eric Dollard. He's alive and well. He's being supported by a lot of fans around the world. So he's doing a great job. But anyhow, one thing about DC current, when you switch off the DC, you just don't throw the switch like that because it would cause that problem. It can burn out circuits, it can put out an EMF, it can do a lot of damage. So the tramways, the railways, what they do, they use a variable resistor to shut it down very gently, and then they switch it back on again, bring it up very gently. Otherwise it can cause problems, and that's what Tesla discovered. But if you do it abruptly, funny, weird and wonderful things happen, as Tesla discovered to his dismay. I've just explained to you why he had that stinging sensation. Okay, what he discovered, this mysterious energy he stumbled across, is not electromagnetic in the usual sense as a Faraday cage screens out all RF energies. Okay, to my understanding, it is a phase conjugated electromagnetic energy. Okay, based on the destructive interference. This appears to be living energy with healing and mood uplifting effects, even possessing its own mind and memory. It was monopolar, such that it could travel along one wire, not two. In other words, it was a phase conjugated scalar electromagnetic or torsion field, which from my understanding appears to be the orgone energy of Wilhelm Reich, Austrian psychoanalyst and student of Sigmund Freud, surge. Yeah. Now, Well, Eric Dollard is actually building all these, wants to build these wooden cliff type towers. Anyhow, I'll keep moving. It is now nearly 9:45, time's getting away from us. But in any case, you've seen that. Now, this is the interesting bit. Eric Dollard, an electrical engineer from California, USA, very independently rediscovered Nikola's Tesla's last record 45 years ago. He's only about 15 years of age when he had this discovery. He's now he's around 60 now. After being shut down by national security 8 times, he's still triumphantly promoting his mission to promote free energy to the world, no doubt upsetting the powers that be, of course. This information is from Uncensored magazine. I'll show you the magazine. I brought it here with me. It's this magazine here, this one.
Comes out monthly.
Yeah. Well, this is a few years old, but I got it out of this very magazine. And there's a sheet I'm passing around at the moment. There's about half a dozen pages in it, and I've highlighted in certain paragraphs with text and colour. So if you've got the details, it's all that you're reading at the moment.
Available in all good news agents.
Yeah. So that's what happened now. See, with Tesla. Thanks to Eric Dollard. There he is there, his photograph. So he's now luckily getting a lot of support thanks to YouTube, internet, his fans around the world. So bring it on, the more of Eric Dollard, the better. Okay, now he explained that the key to the transmission of this energy is through the body of the Earth, not the atmosphere, because mainstream science believes that you had to transmit the energy through the atmosphere to tune into the human resonance of the Earth. The human resonance actually being translated to the Earth's circumference. It's the alpha brainwave frequency, which is 7.8 hertz, but you convert that to wavelength, you've got the Earth's circumference. That's called the human resonance. Well, Tesla is working with that to transmit energy to the Earth and back again like that. This is how his magnifying transmitter is working. But the thing is, mainstream science says, I sent it through the atmosphere. No, he sent it through the body of the planet, not the atmosphere. That was his secret, and Eric Dollard actually rediscovered that. Tesla demonstrated this by lighting up lamp bulbs by simply plugging them into the Earth, even at a distance of several miles from Wardenclyffe. When he had that massive electrical storm happening, he was able to light up lamp bulbs, up to 10 miles away. So to achieve this, he developed a special underground antenna beneath the hour, its actual design being kept top secret. That's one thing that Eric Dollard did explain. That antenna is still there, but that's all hush, it's all shut down. We'll never know the antenna. My theory is it's a fractal, probably a double helical design. That's my theory. I'm just guessing, I don't know. No one really knows. This reveals that mass and radiant energy or life force have a powerful affinity for each other, which would explain the mass-gravity connection. Gets back to Newton, why the apple fell on his head, and why the Earth's mass pulled the apple to the ground. Because I think you're dealing actually with life force, which causes, in the presence of matter, we see it as a gravitational field. I'll keep going with this. Tesla concluded his Wardenclyffe tower turned out to be a magnifying transmitter, because I said before, when you get the Earth going like that, you bounce energy back and forth, it resonates, based on the Solton effect. He was actually pulling energy out of the ether. But also he observed that a pink halo surrounded the dome on top of the tower. When all that lightning is happening, it got a pink halo, which in actual fact is nitric oxide plasma. Now, nitric oxide plasma is a matter material. In other words, it's a phase conjugate mirror. And what actually happens, it interacts with the natural background microwave radiation. Even John Searle, when he built his flying saucers, he observed a similar thing, the blue orgone glow, and then when it lifted up to a certain height, it developed a pink glow around it. And that's when it just took off at lightning speed, because because he created a very powerful scalar field, which is no longer has inertia. Now, it was at that point that he had that painful stinging sensation. He discovered that he's being exposed to phase conjugated microwaves, not the ordinary kind, which is the photon energy, as in radar or microwave ovens. Now, I've got another book here called by Paula Violet, Secrets of Anti-Gravity. It's this book I've got there, that one there. So I brought it here, you might want to peruse through that a bit later on. But that's where I got that information from. And Tom Bearden says, and so is Dan Winter. So that's, but these microwaves, these are the high frequency sub-millimetre wavelengths, which I think is very much an important feature of life force. It is my understanding that these subtle energies would most likely be in the sub-millimetre wavelengths, which is 300 gigahertz to 1000 gigahertz, 1 terahertz frequency range. Not to be confused with the 900 megahertz frequencies, wavelength of about 12 inches, this sort of wavelength, right? These are very toxic, used for smart meter, telephone, Wi-Fi use. So the low frequency microwaves are the toxic ones. The natural microwaves, which astrophysicists work with to map the whole universe, they work with those same frequencies up here. According to Joseph H. Kaler, it is a sub-millimetre wavelength radiation. It's my view that it is the phase conjugated variety, making it a scalar wave or torsion field. Okay, I'll show you in the next slide. That's right, yeah. Okay, once again, I had this slide up earlier on, passing a sheet around. Now, he put out 2 books, Awesome Life Force and Ultimate Reality. See, he reckons that gravity is caused by sub-millimetre microwave frequencies as the end product of red shifted far infrared radiations that obey the inverse square law of Sir Isaac Newton. So you're clear about that. Far infrared, people say that energy losses is heat. You know, based on the law of entropy, okay, the first law, the second law of thermodynamics, and the first law of thermodynamics. But that's incomplete. Where does heat go? It just doesn't disappear. It's got to go somewhere. My understanding is when it gets down to that sub-millimetre microwave frequency, the plasmas in space cause it to phase conjugate. That is my understanding of it. That came to me intuitively when I was at a Dan Winter talk a few years back. But in any case, I've got that diagram on the left again, which you've seen before. Okay, in the latest Dan Winter publication, Fractal Conjugate Space-Time, reference was made to another interesting guy called Bob Dratch. He's still alive, but he's probably gone into hiding because he's been shut down a few times as well. He's an associated Slim Spirit who did die back in 2007. He's the inventor of light life technology. I actually looked at Bob Dratch's website, I checked it out. He was very much into Tesla type technology. Apparently the Adelaide ASTRO group, they do know of Bob Dratch. So he's still around, but I think he's sort of, in the background. He's an associate of Dan Winter. But this guy, Bob Dratch, made some very interesting observations. Because he's very knowledgeable in the fields of scalar physics, subtle energy, radiology, etc. Associate of Dan Winter. That's more about Bob Dratch. He actually measured a microwave frequency associated with mitosis or cellular reproduction. I remember when I studied biology years ago at college, they showed when you actually get a parent cell and you split it, you get rails. It's like pulling 2 masses of glue apart and you get those strands in between. Well, I think those strands are microtubules which transmit this high frequency microwave radiation. And that comes from the mitochondria of the cells, not the DNA, but the mitochondria. Now that's at the cellular level. He observed and measured the same energy is associated with the sexual energy of Wilhelm Reich, orgon Kundalini. It's the same energy, the same frequency. So in other words, sexual energy does put out a subtle microwave frequency. Furthermore, with the help of these measurements, he devised a way to directly access the actual subconscious minds of mental patients working with these microwave energies. I do have some material on that here, so I'd like to look at.
That's a lot of Royal Life's work as well.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Well, I'll just pass this around, just have a look at that. I outlined it in red. But anyhow, apparently in hospitals they had these microwave scanners, and Bob Dratch used these to help mental patients. My understanding of that is if a person's mentally ill, a person has an orgasm or whatever you like to call it, okay, it puts out a particular frequency, and it reaches all the imperfections in that person's psychological makeup. So he found a way of correcting that. Well, guess what happened to him? He was shut down by national security. Now, he even observed and measured these same frequencies associated directly with the Earth's magnetic dodecahedral grid. So, here's our dodecahedron. Even to this shape, the energies resonate with this. So he's a very, very, very clever man, a very smart man. So I'll keep going. Okay, well here we go. You can see the diagram at the top. I'll show you the slide for that. It's here somewhere. Now here it is, I found it. So just have a close look at that. I'll pass it around. Okay. In my opinion, this would be none other than the fine structure of the Earth's gravitational field, which extends well into space, manifesting stable orbits as well, and the geometric principle by which that happens. If you get this dodecahedron, which represents the Earth, you stellate it, you get this interesting shape. So this would correspond maybe to one of the orbits above the Earth. Okay, now if you stellate this even further,
You might have to stand under the light, Ken. Under the light, as in this light. This light.
Yeah, see this shape, it goes from a icosahedron, and if you stellate that even further, you get this interesting shape. So in a way, if you look at all the planetary orbits, they all follow the golden ratio. Now, David Wilcock does explain that very, very clearly as well. So are you all clear on that? Okay. I'll keep going. You don't need the lights anymore, thanks. Okay, now Dan Winter also made reference to another interesting guy called Itzhak Ben Bentov. Now, who of you have heard of Ben Bentov? He's a guy who died in an aircraft crash a few years back. He's quite brilliant, but he actually developed a special technology for measuring Kundalini with the use of a capacitive accelerometer. Now, when you measure accelerations, bear in mind you've got two types of accelerations. You've got those with inertia. So when you apply a force, you get a reaction called Newton's third law of motion. That is action-reaction. That's what normally happens with any given mass. But when you're dealing with a space-time distortion, this is a different type of acceleration that has no inertia, and this is what can take you beyond the speed of light, so you can travel instantly to another galaxy just like that. I snap my fingers, it could be in another galaxy millions of light years away. That sort of technology. Now, that accelerometer that he developed is also based, what I can understand, is based on the principles of Thomas Townsend Brown, who worked with electrogravitics. In other words, he had a special type of capacitor that when you stress it with a high voltage, a sudden high voltage, it will put out a gravitational effect. So it's a very special type of capacitative circuitry that is needed to measure that. Well, if you like, I'll just hand these out and you get a bit more details on it there, especially on those ones that are marked in red. Have a look at that, pass it around.
Quite a few people have replicated Townsend Brown's work, Ken, and it's actually on YouTube.
Yep.
So you can actually see.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff in Townsend Brown, but the thing is, this capacitative, well, that bits of paper I'm handing out at the moment does have like a circuit diagram of what how Downick and Ramsey developed. You see, they invented a similar technology based on the principles of capacitative inductors to observe and measure gravity waves from distant galaxies that can propagate instantaneously faster than light or tachyon energies. Now, most of you have heard of the word tachyon. That's a fairly common term these days. Tachyons, it means faster than light.
Bruce Cathy also did work on the Earth grid.
That's right. That's correct. So here's some science. You've got Dan Winter, Ben Bentoff, and now Gregory Downick using a similar circuitry for measuring not just sexual energy as an acceleration, but for distant gravity waves coming from distant galaxies. So at this point, I get into another interesting subject called redshift. Mainstream science says that the farthest galaxies have the greatest acceleration away from each other. That's based on the Doppler effect, which is the apparent frequency increase of a train whistle during its approach, followed by a corresponding pitch decrease as it moves away. It goes like that, right? That type of sound. This would suggest a state of positive entropy, order into chaos, an accelerated breakdown leading to the extinction of the universe. Now, I've yet to find an answer. As the universe expands, these distant galaxies, where does that hell go to? No one knows. An increasing number of astronomers and astrophysicists are refuting this concept. So to me, it just doesn't make sense, because you've got to take into account negative entropy, chaos back into order, because the universe is a living thing. It's alive like us. And our mainstream science is very atheistic and very materialistic, and it's all purely logical or left-brain stuff. It's not as simple as that. They're only giving half the truth as far as I'm concerned. Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, now, it is my belief that the plasmas between the galaxies may be one proton and alpha particle per cubic mile of empty space. Axial redshifts all ultraviolet, visible and infrared frequencies, till the end product is a sub-millimetre microwave radiation. Now once again, get out there between the galaxies, everything appears to be empty. It's not really that empty at all. Even one alpha particle or proton in any given cubic mile of space over those huge distances, billions of light years, is enough to redshift all black body radiation. Now I've got something in that here I'd like you to have a look at. I'll just pass this around, have a look at that, and it explains it a bit more. Now, these diagrams on the left are very interesting. I'll explain the significance of that. This redshift is just like how coloured sunsets and sunrises occur due to the sun shining through more atmosphere. Now, go back to Easter Saturday. We saw that with the blood moon. That coppery colour on the moon was the effect of a red-shifted sunlight shining on the moon's surface, because it was like looking at a sunrise, sunset simultaneously. In other words, if you're on the moon at the time, the sunlight would be red, just like sunset, sunrise. That's why I call it the blood moon. So that's what this is about. Okay, at these 300,000 gigahertz frequencies, plasmas actually cause phase conjugation of these microwaves such that they become gravity radiations that obey the inverse square law. Okay, so I'll go back to all those slides, 12, 13, 14, 18, maybe do that a bit later. Would you like me to flash back to those slides now? It's up to you.
Keep going.
I've got time I can flash back to them, but I will keep going at this stage. Now, according to Dan Winter, these scalar-type energies have a negative entropy, a concept coined by Ilya Pigajon, who died in 2003. He was a Russian-Belgian physical chemist who was a Nobel Prize laureate in 1977. That's according to Tom Bearden. It is significant that these sub-millimetre microwaves are the most penetrating frequencies in the entire black body electromagnetic spectrum. Okay, you clear on that? Which is the most likely reason they are utilised to probe the farthest reaches of the universe. Getting back to those diagrams in red, as I showed you before. In my opinion, these radiations have a temperature of 2.7 degrees Kelvin or minus 270.4 degrees Celsius, the boiling point of liquid helium, and may well explain why Henry Cavendish took ambient temperature into account when determining the universal constant of gravitation. Now have a close look at this. Now, I got this out of an astrophysics magazines, and I'm going to show you something very significant. Just have a look at this as well. I'll pass it around. It's on that page there. Now, it is very significant that these background microwave radiations of the cosmos reveal from startling features that the galaxies are arranged into clusters, superclusters, and cellular-like arrangements. This is what they call the brain theory. They have the superstring theory, now the brain theory of the universe. Right?
It's called Boltzmann's brain.
Huh?
It's called the Boltzmann's brain.
Yeah, exactly. But I'll explain what the brain is. This is spelled B-R-A-N-E. It means like a membrane. So that's what that diagram up top, if you look at that very, very closely, that's using thermal energy. This is thermal energy bordering on the microwave frequencies. And those different colours shows the slight variations in temperature. Where you've got the space between the galaxies where the galaxies are themselves. Between the galaxies are strings of energy forming a spiderweb pattern, see on the right there, very similar to the arrangements of the neurons comprising the grey matter in the mammalian brain. That's what the diagram thing shows. I've read that in a number of different sources of Dan Winter's stuff. It is very interesting how the very neurons that make up our brain is reflected in the cosmos. That is very interesting. One could say that the universe is God's brain. Yeah, that's good. That's a good way. God has a brain. Well, what's his brain? It's the universe. Pretty obvious to me. But so in effect, this could be regarded as using Korean photography. Now, you asked about that before. Korean photography to reveal the meridians of psychic energy linking the galaxies, as this technique utilises the microwave patterns associated with plasmas generated from a Tesla coil. Now, Korean photography is basically when you photograph a person's auric field, you can see their meridians of energy, you see where their consciousness flows. It does in fact flow through the microtubules. Now the microtubules in themselves are made of hormone protein or skin, which is a phase conjugate piezoelectric material, and these transmit these very high frequency microwaves through the body, and the same thing is happening out there in the cosmos. It's once again using the same frequencies that associated with the microwaves coming from the Tesla coil. The very microwaves that were stinging Tesla at Wardenclyffe and held at a very high intensity, okay, and affecting his conscious awareness. So these microwaves play a very important role in the transmission of thought, feeling, consciousness, mind energy in itself. And that's why it just like, here's the universe here, yes, I'll take a clear photograph of it, and guess what you see is that. So that's pretty full-on stuff. So now that leads on to the next thing, cosmic intelligence. I got this out of someone sent me just recently on the internet. In 2014, scientists from the Harvard-Smithsonian Centre for Astrophysics announced a discovery for faint signal in the cosmic microwave background suggesting the first direct evidence of gravitational waves hotly debated. Isn't it interesting? Mate, obviously the publishers find that a little bit sensitive. They don't want us to know about gravity or anti-gravity. Isn't it interesting? Hotly debated. Yeah, very interesting. In my opinion, it is clearly apparent that the entire universe is a vast living biological organism revealing two important things. Number one, the life force of the cosmos is revealed as ley lines linking the galaxies, the fine structure of universal gravity or life force. Now, I explained to you about the ley lines around the Earth based on the dodecahedron model. Well, this applies to the entire cosmos. These ley lines go everywhere. Now, on a metaphysical level, the cosmos apparently has a soul that could be termed cosmic intelligence or simply God. As far as I'm concerned, this is proof that God exists. So all those atheistic scientists out there have to rethink and understand that the universe is a living, loving, intelligent organism. And that's the sort of the thrust of my message. I'll keep going. According to Nassim Haramein, who of you have heard of Nassim Haramein? Okay, a number of you have, that's good. Now he's an associate of Dan Ritter, he's a Swiss scientist, and Dan Ritter working with him. He explained how the fine structure of the universe reveals a definite fractal golden ratio-based pattern. He's into what you call the scaling law.
It talks about the golden mean extending out to the solar system
That's,
and the universe.
Yeah, into the multiverse, the omniverse.
Galaxy and
Yeah, the omniverse, yeah.
clusters.
Goes forever.
Yeah.
It goes to God. Yeah. Okay, this is both beautiful and attractive. It actually reflects unconditional love. Remember the biblical statement, God is love and love is God. This is what I'm here to, explain. Coming from a pure scientific approach. I'm not coming from a religious approach. I've got my beliefs in that regard, but I'm not a religious person. I'm basically trained as a scientist, as you well know. Now, on the internet, this is some mind-blowing stuff that I come across myself. I stumbled across a very profound mathematical statement directly connecting two universal constants. I saw this a few years back. I'd like to find out where I'll get the information from so I can explain the source of it. But what I discovered, the universal constant of gravitation is the magnetic permittivity of vacuum, closely related to the speed of light, divided by this interesting figure here, 137.05 squared. On the next slide, I'll get into that in a bit more detail. That's pretty mind-blowing stuff. What that is all about, that interesting figure. Now, so just look at that for a moment. mu naught is the magnetic permittivity of vacuum. Let's come over to the next slide. Okay, so this constant mu naught is closely related to the speed of light c. Mu naught epsilon naught equals 1/c squared. The James Clerk Maxwell worked that out based on the electric permeability of vacuum. Bear in mind that these earlier physicists were all believers in the ether theory, including Einstein, he was too. Okay, now, so getting back to that interesting number, 137.05, this number is the fine structured constant. It's a pure number without units. Now, who of you have heard of that number? Any of you in this room? Yeah, I've seen it in a science magazine. I've got a science magazine on this table here somewhere. I'll show it to you. Yeah, Scientific American. As I was reading through it, I saw a reference to that particular number once. It's a very interesting figure, 137.05. Okay, it's actually its reciprocal, to be exact. But let's look at this number without units. It's a pure number without units. Just bear that in mind. Through my own research, with the help of a pocket calculator, in combination with material from one of Dan Ritter's publications, I personally discovered something very significant. This is my own stuff. This is coming from me, found it by accident, you might say. Here I go. That's number 20 by 233 over 34. Those numbers are in the Fibonacci sequence. Remember the Fibonacci sequence? That'll be on the next slide. Times 20 gives you that figure.
Isn't that the golden mean?
Yeah, well, I'm coming on the next slide. Just look at those numbers. 20, 233 and 34. Okay, I'll go on the next slide. Have a look. Remember the Fibonacci sequence. Remember slide number 7 I went back earlier in the talk? See the numbers there? Now I highlighted 233 and 34. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. This sequence reveals two key numbers, 34 and 233. Therefore can be concluded that the fine structure constant is a composite of just 4 of these numbers. 4 only. Here we go. 2 by 2 again, by 5, by 233 divided by 34 gives 137.05. It's reciprocal of 1. It's 1 over 137.05. So therefore, in my opinion, this would have to be the mathematical explanation of the fine structure of fractal space-time, which is the basis of its intelligence and divine love. So I have now shared with you the mathematical proof of divinity and God's unconditional love for all living things, right across the omniverse. Okay, now I'm going to get on to another section. I've only got about 15 minutes left to talk, 10-15 minutes. I'm going to talk a bit about our future. Now I'm just going to share with you why I showed those symbols, the significance of them. So I'm going to pass this around, have a look at those symbols I definitely pulled off the web. Okay, shaping our future. I showed some examples of futuristic cities, the possibility of living in space, the diagram on the right, where you go like that, and it rotates. Then I got on a bit on Tesla, free energy, the QEG over unity. There's been a lot of stuff on the internet about the QEG, the Hope Girl website. That's it there. Then we've got the electromedicine, the hemp seed plant. Hemp, by the way, is healing people with cancer. There's a very good friend of mine that had prostate cancer, and he healed himself with hemp seed oil. So there you go. And on the right, you've got the Lakosky multi-wave oscillator. That is an interesting technology in itself as well. I'll just explain to you how it works. You have an antenna, which is made of those strips of aluminium in a semicircular fashion, and on the other side you have the same setup, but you put it 180 degrees out of phase. This is the antenna, this is a resonator. Now when you activate it with a Tesla coil, that puts out broadband microwave energy.
I just want to point out to everyone that photo on the edge there with the two circles, next to the hemp, that looks a lot like the Time Machine TV show thing from the 60s.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting. Well, in a way, technically speaking, you can say it like you go to the diagram underneath it, which shows a wormhole. Now, but getting back to the Lakosky microwave oscillator, this guy in Lakosky back in 1931, he treated people with cancer, arthritis. It only took about 3 or 4 treatments, and he fixed them up. Because how it works, this puts out a broad microwave energy on this side, and on this side it phase conjugates it. And so the body is now being exposed to phase conjugated microwave energy, but because it forces harmonics, these harmonics go broad spectrum. They go well into the infrared, maybe into the visible frequencies, as well as into the RF. And so when you force harmonics, you are creating a very, very, very wide range of phase conjugated black body frequencies which have healing effects.
Is that like the right?
Yeah, similar principle, correct. Yeah. Well, I'll just share something with you at this point. Now, I heard that these astronauts, when they were in space, right, they had weakened muscle mass because they're in free fall. There's gravity out there, but because you're in orbit, they're in free fall. And so they had nothing to exercise, their bodies, so their muscles got weaker. So sure, they put them in a centrifuge and they regained muscle mass, but there's still one thing missing. The calcium is still being leached from their bones, so there's something else missing up there in space. And what I think it's the gravity radiation in itself coming from the planet is needed to help restore the calcium metabolism in the bones. And it's a phase conjugated microwave frequencies that have a healing effect. Maybe this is how the cosmic microwave oscillators work, on that principle. So we do need gravitational energy for our health and well-being. It's not healthy to be up in space where gravity is much weaker in accordance with the inverse square law of gravitation. Pretty obvious to me.
Yes, they can only stay up there so long.
That's right.
And then they're sick when they come back.
Of course.
The gravity affects their organs too,
Yeah.
the main organs, and everything affects everything.
Yeah, but this is not just gravity as an acceleration, this has a field itself as a microwave energy as well. But in any case, I showed some other diagrams like a spaceship, and also this one here, second from the right. I thought this is what happens when you go faster than light speed. Now, Athol, I'd like you to mention briefly the experience that you had when you had the experience with the E2s.
Most of you know that I spent time on flying saucers, and the way that they used to travel from one place to another was that the pilot or the navigator would put their consciousness into a crystal, and then that energy from there would go into the electromagnetic energies of the spaceship, and it would just be there. So what Kevin's saying just ties up completely with how UFOs travel from one space to another.
And I know what you explained, that when the ship accelerated, the stars become streaks of light. Yeah, there's in Star Wars.
Yeah.
That's taken out of the Star Wars movie.
Yeah, it's exactly the same as the movie.
Yeah, that's the effect you have when you break through the light barrier. That's exactly what you experience through a wormhole.
It's an example that our entertainment is not really entertainment, it's science fact.
Yeah, it's good. Well, that's what Jonathan Ison says of the book Suppressed Inventions. I read his book. Science fiction is suppressed science fact. Yeah.
And they mix it up with fiction as well.
Yeah,
They
they
mix
sure
fiction
do.
with it so nobody knows which is.
That's right, confuse us. And of course, down the bottom, I had a bit about our financial future, our political future, and how we're going to restore the planet to its pristine state. So eventually, look at the one in the bottom right-hand corner, will eventually bring heaven to earth. Now, I'm just going to explain to you just a few slides that I have put in relation to this. I'm almost finished now. Our future continued. It is very positive. There is nothing to fear in spite of all the doom and gloom material propagated by the mainstream media. Free energy is available to all. Well, the good news is I checked the alternative websites. I can tell you right now, free energy technology is now starting to pour out of the woodwork. It's coming out thick and fast. I'm very impressed. In fact, I just downloaded some stuff I've got here on this table, some stuff I printed out only recently. Now, maybe Ian, into the Climatex Solutions meeting, I'll bring the stuff along and we can peruse through it there. And so that's free energy. It is actively suppressed by the powers that be. It can be used to heal and terraform the planet. But its misuse in the wrong hands can be very dangerous. Because they say that Dan Witter says free energy is not really free at all. My understanding is when they sunk Atlantis, that they misused the free energy so much, I believe it destabilised the Earth's gravitational field. There had too much gravity there, too little here, and it caused an earthquake and sunk the whole continent. And so Dan Witter says you've got to put energy back into gravity. It's very important that you restore that fine balance of the ley lines of the Earth's gravitational field. That's called heal. That's how we heal the planet at a more deeper level. It is the manipulation of life force that is tested energy for healing and anti-gravity purposes. That's what's coming out. This is what the powers that be don't like. I'll go to the next slide. Now we have access to natural medicine and the use of homeopathy herbs and the knowledge of health diets. And that's on the internet. There's a heap of stuff I've got a database of about 70 people I send stuff to, especially health-related material. I'm focusing more on that because we need to know that, because the whole medical profession don't want us to know about it. But thanks to the internet and to Facebook, we're getting it out there. Now, also electromedicine using the cosmic microwave oscillators I explained before, uses phase conjugated broadband microwave frequencies for healing purposes, is available. That's you can get that. You can even print it out. I did it myself. You actually got a circuit. You can print it out. It's quite easy to do. Now again, the time reversal technologies can likewise be applied for healing. Tom Beard and Dan Ritter explains that. There's a guy in France called Antoine Priori who actually built a healing device based on time reversal. And he's able to restore, even David Wilcock explained in his book, Soil Field Investigations. There are technologies there where, for example, if you shine a laser through a healthy raspberry plant, let's say, and you direct that light onto an unhealthy raspberry plant, its health will be fully restored. So if you can do it with raspberries, why can't you do it with plants and animals and human beings? Why not?
You just got to find a healthy human to do it with.
Yeah, exactly. And a sane human.
Yeah.
You hit the nail on the right head.
Do you remember the laser lights they used for healing?
Yeah.
You remember those little laser lights
Yeah.
demonstrated
Yeah.
years ago?
Yeah. Well, they're the technologies that are available. Also, we have deep space travel using faster-than-light technologies will be available. And this includes wormhole or black hole manifestation, which Pettigrew demonstrated with a little bit of DNA. If you can do it with DNA, why can't you do it on a bigger scale? You take the Norwegian spiral that's been seen over Norway, Moscow and other places. I've actually seen on YouTube a UFO actually go into a spiral. Like you get a spiral in the sky and UFO disappears into it.
I'd like to
They create wormholes.
point out that Norway spiral that you're referring to,
Yeah.
I think has direct correlations with the Celtic spirals on the stones.
There you go. Yeah.
I think it's the same thing.
Yeah, that would concur. That would make sense. Yes, it would. Yep, I agree with that. So that's what about wormhole manifestation. This also includes suppressed UFO technologies. Now, this is
I have shown on, they've had it on radar where they spot it on radar, it goes along, all of a sudden it just vanishes.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's how they go
Goes in
cloak
another dimension.
and decloak. Yeah. Yeah, like parallel dimension, that's right, yep. Okay, this is the last slide. Now, I also mentioned our financial and political infrastructure is currently undergoing massive changes, and I mean currently. Turn to the mainstream media, they don't breathe a word about it.
You're not allowed to.
No, of course they're not. All they will do is keep us entertained with sport and glamour, and that's it.
Sport and crap.
Yeah, it's just nonsense.
Or crap and crap.
So once again, this sort of information is on the internet. I go to the alternative news websites. So just write this down because I look at these every night. Essentialoferth.com. It's a really, really good alternative news website. It's got many, many, many links to it. But the ones I look at is ChronoPay@wordpress.com. Jean Haynes is a good one. Many other related sites on the Essential of the Earth homepage. Click on links of interest. And it is never, I repeat, never mainstream news. This is the source of the much needed hope, of info, I should say, that gives us hope. So,
Dan Winter's website, by the way, is Golden Mean.
yeah, that's correct. So that is the end of my presentation, the slide presentation.
Ken, on behalf of ASTRO, I'd like me to present you with this.
This is a secret I got the first one years ago.
Yeah, well, you can add this one.
Nice shapes.
You can add this one to your collection.
Thank you for it. It's done really nicely. Yeah, thank
And actually, it was Ken Ballard that did the artwork on that. So, he was a past member of ASTRO. He passed away quite a while ago. So it sort of goes really well with what we've talked about and what we've had tonight. What I'd like to say about all this is that there's so much out there that we really, really need to try and be discerning about what information we believe and don't believe, whether it's from the powers that be or the non-powers that be. Don't forget that the easiest way to get you disinterested in something is to put a design of something up on the net, claim it to be a free energy device, and then make sure that there are enough errors in the design that you can't pick, but that will stop the free energy device from working. So of course you go spending all your money, you go doing all your experimenting, and then it doesn't work. And I can tell you from a couple of people I've known in the past that some of people's websites are actually hijacked to a point where the person doesn't know their website's hijacked. The person uploads his files to the website. They might be PDFs or whatever. There's what they call a ghost image of that website that's controlled by the powers that be. What they do is they take the files that he's put up there and they change certain values and certain information. Not much, but enough to make it not work. And in subtle places so that it's not really obvious. And then what they do is they allow that to be the site that everyone else sees. Right? There was a guy I know that one of the things he did was he told some of his friends he was putting up a new file on the site, and he told them to have a look at it. And when they did, and they said, look, I remember you telling me this figure was this and this and this, but it's not on the website. So he says, what do you mean? And he opened up his page and went in there, and it was correct because he was looking at the one that he put up there, right? So the guy says, it's not, I can tell you it's not. And so when he had an opportunity, he went and visited his friend. And his friend then said, hey, look, I'll show you. And he logged onto the same website, and lo and behold, the data had been changed. And so this guy says, well, I've got to do something about this. So he put on all his files an encrypted code which allowed the people he was passing the information to, which he'd email later the key to the code. He'd say, when you open the file, use this code, and if there's any changes, disregard the file. So what used to happen was they'd open the file and they'd run the code on it, and the code would tell them that a lot of the values of certain things had changed, and so all of a sudden no one was copying or doing any of the designs, right? And eventually no one looked at the main page anymore, right? Because they knew, he'd worked out a way to get around it. But that's kind of things that happen out there.